these are the purchases ahead of turn 5, but first I have to correct a corruption. Bomber that sat here is reminding me that it was purchased in an earlier round, it was placed in America land, and I forgot to fly over on the last turn to the UK. So I've made that choice. Nobody's crying, no foul. The other corruption was somehow I just found on the floor a British destroyer. Cannot think whether it was placed on the board in the buy zone or fell out of my sleeve. That's how I win some of these games, hiding things up my sleeve, by the way. But if you find that there's a destroyer that's missing that you think I've made a mistake with, I probably have. Before we do the buy and run through the purchase, I'll show you something with Germany. Here are their purchases, all land-based. We'll go over to the map and I'll talk to you there. The Britlanders are going to lose their fleet up here in the North Sea. I'm imagining that the Germans will just come in and pop them for fun. They cannot, however, Germans, get to these Americans out here. They will have some sort of say in any reprisal attacks. But with the Brits landing here in Northern Europe, under normal circumstances, Germany would just go and squash them and reinforce. But as you know, we're trying this different rule out. It does mean that if Germany committed all of their forces from Germany into Northern Europe and failed, Brits could walk in and explode the game. Same thing with France. If France moved in and the attack was successful, it's only Italy that could back up France, which it starts to leave holes everywhere. So we go back to the board. You understand my thinking? I'm glad somebody does. So there we have Germany emptying the Bundesbank entirely for this buy. America have also borrowed some money from their banking system to get a destroyer, a submarine, some transport and some fellas on the map. The UK have learnt from the mistakes from my mistakes from last round, and they've got themselves a couple of destroyers and one transport. They're going to try and hold on to India. They've bought for India. Obviously, those guys can be placed in the UK if necessary. Moving on to Japan. Well, they couldn't telegraph their move more if their name was Joe Vodafone. They're getting battleships on the board. I think there's going to be a battle in the Pacific very quickly. And finally, the sleeping bear appears to have woken up a weary eye. It's getting artillery rather than infantry. They have enough infantry now to start thinking about a push. So next turn, look out Germany, Russia are on the way. That is turn 5 done and dusted, and it was a sitting on the shelf collecting dust type of round in some of these places. Russia did no more than move troops from Moscow down to the Caucasus, figuring they had enough troops in Moscow itself. Germany couldn't pull the trigger. Before they've had their non-com move here, it was touch and go. They probably would be running back towards Berlin with their tail between their legs right now if they had have made that attack. And of course, you don't want to be fighting on two fronts unless you're very sure of a good supply line both ways. Let's look at the other front where Britain had invaded northwestern Europe. Well, the big news is, I guess, that northwestern Europe is back in Axis hands again. It was a bit of a bloody battle. Germany have only got 2 tanks left in there now. They split their attack, taking tanks from France and infantry and artillery from Germany. They did, of course, move their destroyer out. There's no British fleet up there anymore. Buoyed by their success in Europe, they came down to North Africa, shipping troops in from Italy across to Libya and moving the Egypt crew into Libya. And on the Americans' turn, they're having none of that, and they wiped out the Germans inside 1.5 turns. It was, probably better move would have been to leave the Germans in Egypt, let the Americans come to them. It's no good thinking about it afterwards. However, you may be able to see up here, the German factory has been right royally bombed. The Brits hit it for 4 in the first place. The Americans came in with their 2 bombers, the one that I forgot to move earlier, and they did 7 damage. So this is going to affect the German buy, or their mobilisation from their orders when we start doing that later on. Obviously, the UK cannot now ship troops into northwestern Europe without any boats. So I think it's going to be a long, drawn-out affair over here in Europe. But with Russia coming from one side, the Brits and the Americans coming from the other side, it shouldn't take more than 4 or 5 years to finish this game. In India, Japan tried to take out the British forces with their bomber, and the anti-aircraft did its job once again. The Japanese ground attack, well, it's called a ground attack because it ground to a halt. They had 9 or 10 units shipping into India, and they got 1 hit. The Brits dug themselves out of their foxholes and took 4 Japanese units in their role. Japan had to pull back. They couldn't risk running forward and leaving the back door open, and have had to rethink really the whole of their Pacific campaign. Because, let's go up to Iwo Jima. That was the idea. They did follow it through in the non-com phase and put their units there. They said to America Land, come and get us, big boy. And on America's turn, I was even starting to load the battle board mentally. And I think with America's fleet in Hawaii being that big, you can see how neatly spaced they are, because I was thinking, pondering, toying, fiddling, and I came to the conclusion it's better if the Americans are defending with their fighters at 4 than attacking with them at 3. Yes, Japan could roll across there to Western United States, but they haven't got any transport there, so they've got a little time there to use their purchases. And America have bought some navy, but it's only 1 destroyer and 1 submarine. These other purchases ahead of turn 6, we'll run through them quickly. The bear over there in the distance, they're just getting men again. Japan are preparing some kind of task force, whether they're attacking the UK in India again, or going to head for America Land, but we'll find out very shortly. The British learnt from my mistakes and have been building up their task force with protection. The USA have got a 2-sided buy once again. Whether they all go to one side or t'other, I'm not entirely sure. We'll see how the game plays out. And Germany wants some fast movers. They're getting some tanks on the board. That is turn 6, all done and dusted. And it's been a mighty difficult time for the Germans. The Great Bear woke up. Its attack from the Caucasus into Ukraine, they pulled off halfway through. They weren't sure quite how successful Russia versus West Russia was going to be, and it was a bit of a romp. They used half of their Russian forces from the Moscow region, or the Russia central region. Half of them went from Russia up to Archangel and swept through there. Germany are in trouble. They themselves tried to use their destroyer that was in Sea Zone 6 to attack the Brits, whose destroyer and transport had spawned from last turn, they also used their fighter, and they probably did regret that. Somehow, a fighter and a destroyer lost out to the two destroyers that were there. They have moved their fleet out of the Med. They've given up on the Mediterranean and North Africa for now by the seam of things, and America are coming around and filling that space in, possibly to come up through the Middle East and help the Russians out if they particularly desire it. In Germany central itself, they've been shuffling forces around like mad hares. If mad hares shuffle their forces around. The UK bombed the German factory. The Americans bombed the German factory. Couldn't catch a break. They haven't yet managed to hit one plane with their anti-aircraft in this entire game, as far as I remember. The Americans are coming over. There's forces now coming in their droves. It can't be long before Overlord happens, albeit in round 6, which might actually be the right time for it. Down in India, Japan had some success. They did push forward. Britain didn't push back. They then rolled again and were unsuccessful, and the UK were successful. It's turning into a World War I scenario there, with just pushing and shoving and digging in trenches. The UK, however, they have taken one of the Money Islands. They've got the East Indies now, with the help of their fighter, which they moved into position for that previous turn. But the big news, are you ready for this? Pearl Harbor-ish didn't quite happen. The Americans didn't push it last turn when they could have attacked out in the Iwo Sea. So the Japanese came to it. Their first attack was an utter failure and a mess. And the American reply was equally brilliant in the reverse. So the Japanese were forced to retreat back to Wake Island. America then said, we're having none of this. They pushed forward, and they were close to squashing that fleet entirely. They had to decide that discretion was the better part of valour, and their reinforcements which came through from the West United States coast have now boosted that fleet up. I'm pretty sure they're going to be chasing them all the way back to Tokyo in the next round. So the money situation is an absolute mess. UK have overtaken Germany on the IPC tracker, so that's going to affect the buying sequence. And with, again, factory damage and regions that have been taken and liberated, it's going to take me a little while to work out who can put what and where. Germany themselves, well, their big decision for next turn is who and where do they defend from. If that invasion happens, they want coastal forces. If the Great Bear continues to come forward, they're going to need land-based forces. Here we go with the round 7 buy. You'll notice that the UK are the first to act in this case. They haven't quite got in front of the USA on the tracker, but they have got some savings in the bank due to their raiding of the Money Islands and the United States helping them out by liberating Egypt. Their buy is predictably an invasion buy, plus a bomber, try and keep wrecking that factory. USA, they're going to help out with the invasion and also boost up something in the Pacific, perhaps thinking about moving themselves forward towards Japan or even the Chinese mainland. You never know. The Germans, on the other hand, well, they've gone for the old Russian tactic of getting men and more men, plus some artillery, and that they're hoping that with the economic damage that's going to be wreaked upon them, they can at least get plenty of men in to bolster up their defences. Japan, on the other hand, well, they're going for a total rebuild from the ground up, stripping away all the rust. They've got to try and get some sort of fleet to protect their transports, of which they have 1, 2, 3 many. And Russia themselves, well, when was the last time we saw this? 4 T-34s come into action, one of my favourite tanks in the game. I will see you after the combat and reinforcements of turn 7. That is turn 7, all done and dusted, and as you can see, it may be the last meaningful round. I got a feeling turn 8 is going to end this game for all sides. As you can see, Russia on this side, they have had a massive push forward. The crew that are up in Archangel hit Karelia, and well, they made rather a meal of it. There was at least 5 rolls from both sides to take out 2 or 3 Germans. It wasn't pretty. It was pretty frustrating. But the West Russia crew moved into Belarusia fairly simply, one round of them, and it's the same with the Caucasus into the Ukraine, putting the Germans into full retreat. The Germans here, well, they're just trying to shuffle around and bolster themselves up. They've got damage to their factories. Again, their anti-aircraft couldn't hit a barn door with a bus. They've got, I think it's 14 damage this time, and there was 1 to pay off from last. They're in trouble. Brits have come over. Bit of a tighter battle on the beaches there at northwestern Europe. However, the Brits got in, and this time round there were Americans there. We got the coordination right this time, and they've backed them up onto the beaches now. It's not done and dusted fully, but I can't really see any way out for Germany here. The Russian tanks coming in from this side can rush their way through. Once they get through the Poland and Bulgaria infantry, which way the Germany defend from? It's flip a coin and hold on to your hats, I think. Before I forget, the German battleship that was here in Sea Zone 13 heading up to Sea Zone 8 to take out the American invasion fleet, or at least to slow them down a little bit. Well, they got into a battle. Let's just say America won and Germany lost. It doesn't rain for Germany. It comes down in buckets. And down in India, once again, the Brits have outperformed themselves massively. They've taken more off the Japs than the Japs have taken off them, and the Japanese have had to start diverting resources elsewhere because of that American hit over in the Pacific. I can't really see Japan continuing this attack. If they had the wherewithal, they may have pressed through that one more go. But now the Americans have arrived in India with that one plane that was hanging around helping out their North African crew. I can't see what Japan are going to do from here either. Britain themselves, they ferried some guys across from the Money Islands that were hanging around there, so it's looking far too good now. Up north, I guess Japan, who were threatening to hit Buryatia, are now thinking, is Buryatia going to come and get us, being as though Russia are on the ascendancy and Germany and Japan are on the descendancy. America have pulled forward from Hawaii into Wake Island and have taken that without opposition. Well, without meaningful opposition. They, however, have to keep one eye on that Japanese fleet. It's not strong, but neither are they particularly. Okay, here we go. Probably for the last time, because as I said to you, round 8 is looking pretty much the end for Germany, and it doesn't look good for Japan. If something really strange happens, then I will show you turn 9. But I think you don't need to see me playing out the gritty end of it all. Over in the UK's purchase, they still are just in front by dint of how much they have in their bank. Predictably, they're continuing their invasion with troops and landing vehicles. The Americans are getting big and bad in the Pacific with a battleship and a destroyer and a landing craft for themselves. I think they're going to transport to one of the islands and probably hit Chinese mainland. Germany, well, they're hanging on. They're just now buying troops and hoping to pay off factory damage before they can get troops on the ground, and you know what I mean. In Russia, they are going for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 T-34 tanks. Famously designed by Mikhail Koshkin, if you didn't know that. That's a true fact. And he named the tank after drinking nearly 3 dozen cups of tea. I won't tell you how the American P-38 got its designation. Japan, they are going to go for the cheap and nasty point of view against the Americans' big and nasty point of view by getting themselves 4 submarines. I shall see you after the non-com, the combat and the reinforcements of turn 8. Well, here we are, end of turn 8, and well, the fat lady hasn't sung yet, but she's certainly getting some oxygen into her lungs. The Russians, as predicted, they just walked through. There was only 1 infantry division in a lot of these regions. Bit of a bigger fight up in the Baltic Seas, Baltic states rather. But these guys are waiting now to get into Berlin. However, the Brits did all the damage. The Brits sacrificed themselves royally. The anti-aircraft guns that were in Germany finally started to hit and took out 3 out of the British 4 planes first time round. However, the infantry there did a sterling job with the artillery support. There was 8 units in there from the Britlanders, and of the 10 German infantry, they got 1 hit on their first roll. They underrolled, certainly, absolutely, no problem at all with that. However, it did result in the Brits being squashed, and the Americans came through and saved the day. I think now all that's left is the Americans can walk into France, 2 artillery there. The Brits will probably take care of that, I should imagine, on their go next. The Italy is a walk-in. Anti-aircraft guns not going to defend itself. Russian tanks may even beat them to it. That would be the 10 victory cities for the Allied forces. Let's not play it out on camera. You know what happens. Over in the Pacific, just to tidy things up. Well, Japan called it a draw down in India. They've just sort of withheld from there. Backing up some troops into mainland China, trying to reinforce Shanghai. It won't do them much good. The Americans are going to prove to be too strong, especially with now they're taking the 10 IPCs from Germany itself. They'll have too much money to be able to be stopped. I shall roll this game out myself because I like to get to a conclusion. However, the next thing you will see is my handsome face. I will do a little summary of things that I found that are good and bad with these rules, although I can't think of too many bads right now. And I will put a set of rules up of a screenshot you can capture so you can play along with these yourself and see if you agree with the bit more fun that I found. Or there is a bad, the accounting. I'll speak to you in a sec. We're a couple of hours out now from the end of the game. I did roll it all through. Obviously, the Allies eventually romped to a victory. The Pacific, it went 2 more rounds than I thought it was going to be. The Japanese Navy, Imperial Navy, did a fine job. India, the Brits expanded out into Burma. Yeah. It was a long drawn out affair. You didn't really need to see all that. However, my review of the rules of Purchase First, Mobilize Last, I did think of a bad. Yes, the trying to consider the IPCs twice in a turn, it can add a little bit of mucky aroundness, if that is actually a phrase, because you do have to think about your purchases on that mobilisation phase, especially when factories were getting bombed. That was quite confusing to me a couple of times, but I did find the best way of doing it was, rather than trying to figure it out mentally, was actually to physically take the IPCs from my little bank store down here and get them in my fingers and be placing one down here, one off there, one in here, one off there, 3 for an infantry. And I kind of fell into the system of that afterwards. The only oddness, which I haven't fully explained, I don't think, when it happened a couple of hours ago, was when a capital city falls, what do you do then with the IPCs? And I simply resolved it by saying, you take whatever money is currently in their bank at that moment, not their potential, because obviously a capital's just fallen, the country's been ravaged by wars. The IPCs that are out in the regions being collected are being snuck away by some very diligent farmers and landowners thinking, I'm going to line my pocket ready for after the war. So it does mean that America, who took Berlin eventually, couldn't take the potential IPC that Germany would have had, or would have had at the start of that round, which would have been around 30 IPCs. So it would have made it slightly faster, I guess, over in the Pacific. But that, I think, is not an unfair way of doing it, because of the actual speed of the game goes through with these rules. For instance, going right back to turn 1, Germany could take Karelia on turn 1 because you just couldn't get the reinforcements in there before the Germans could have their go. So there's swings and roundabouts with it. I hope you give it a go for these rules and enjoy them as I have done. Take them for the fun that they are. If you find a tweak that you think, wow, great, you should try this version of it, I'm happy to hear your views in the comments, even if you don't like this set of rules entirely. And because there were moments when I was chuffing around with the IPCs thinking, is this really how I want to play the game? And as a diversion, yes, it is how I want to play the game for a once in a while. My own gameplay review of my play, I don't think I played Japan very well, especially against India. I'll have to look back and see whether I played it wrong or whether the dice rolls were going against Japan. I think a few times they possibly were, as in with the fall of Germany. They had 10 infantry in there, and they couldn't hit anything. And I wasn't so happy with the early rounds with Russia, because I thought perhaps I could have been more defensive. I like to be aggressive with Russia as much as I can, because otherwise it turns into a boring game for Russia. But I think where they can't reinforce, they should really just go turn 1, 8 infantry, put up the shutters and come and get me. But I'm not entirely sure about that. So, last thing to say, as I say with all my videos, is I make these on behalf of a charity called the Cure Parkinson's Trust. You will find a link to their website down there. There'll also be one in the banner on the channel page. If you have a spare IPC, a euro, a yen, or a T34, you could send their way. I'm sure they would appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining me. I will see you sometime in the future. Not sure when I'm going to have time to do another full-length video, but until then, be cool.